The midnight road. You know, people often tell me that road trips are supposed to be the best kind of adventure. They say it's about the freedom of the open road, the thrill of new places, and the joy of getting lost, finding yourself in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nature, far from the hustle of daily life. But for me, that's when the worst things happened. It started out like any normal trip. I was driving through the back roads of this long-forgotten country highway, a stretch of road so isolated that the only company I had was the hum of my engine and the occasional rumble of gravel beneath my tires. I had a few days off work and my mind was filled with thoughts of nothing but peace, quiet, and a little bit of solitude. I've always been the type to enjoy the journey, not the destination. It was the middle of October, so the air was crisp, the trees were turning orange and red, and I couldn't help but marvel at how beautiful the world was. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, leaving a soft purple hue in the sky. Everything seemed perfect. That's when I made my first mistake. I took that one last turn off the main highway. It was a sign, a simple wooden one that was weathered by time and barely legible. Old Hollow Road, it read, and underneath, in smaller letters, no outlet. I don't know why, but something about the name pulled at me. I turned onto that road knowing full well that I had no idea where it would lead. The further I went, the more I felt it. Something was off. The road narrowed, the trees closing in on either side like watchful eyes. The silence was suffocating, but there was also a kind of peace in it. No cars, no people, no sounds other than the crunching of the tires against the gravel. It almost felt as though time itself had slowed down. After a while, I saw a flicker in the corner of my eye. Just for a second, there was something, or someone, moving in the shadows of the trees. I dismissed it. Probably just an animal, I told myself. Maybe a deer or a raccoon. I was in the woods after all, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. The road twisted ahead, climbing steeply now. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the trees seemed to stretch higher, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers. There was no light up here, nothing to break the deep black of the night, and the deeper I went into the woods, the more I felt the pressure building. Then came the first real sign. Out of nowhere, I heard a whisper, a faint voice almost lost in the wind. It was so soft I could barely make it out. "Help me," it said, the words dragging out like a desperate plea. I jerked my head around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. No movement, no shadow, just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe my imagination running wild. I'd been driving for a long time. Maybe I was just tired. So I shook it off and kept going, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. But the whisper lingered, like it was still echoing in my mind. The road dipped into a small valley, and that's when I saw it. A house, or what was left of a house. The structure was abandoned, its windows dark and shattered, the roof half collapsed. There was an old rusted mailbox at the end of the driveway. I slowed down as I passed, my curiosity piqued. The place looked ancient, almost like it had been untouched for decades. As I glanced over, something caught my eye. A figure standing at the broken window. Just for a moment, I saw a silhouette, dark and thin. I don't know why, but I stopped the car. It wasn't like me to pull over on an empty road like that, but something about the place called out to me. Maybe I was looking for adventure, or maybe I was just tired and needed to stretch my legs. Whatever the reason, I pulled the handbrake and stepped out of the car. The air around the house was heavy, thick with a dampness that had nothing to do with the weather. I made my way up the gravel driveway, each step crunching loudly in the stillness. The house loomed ahead, its empty windows staring down at me like hollow eyes. It was cold, colder than it should have been, like stepping into a freezer. I reached the front door, which was slightly ajar. The hinges squealed as I pushed it open, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, it was dark. So dark that even my flashlight seemed to do little more than highlight the dust in the air. The place reeked of mold and rot. It felt like time had stopped in that room, frozen in place. There was an old rocking chair in the corner, rocking ever so slightly, as though someone had just been sitting there moments before. That's when I heard it again, the whisper. It was clearer this time, almost like it was right behind me. "Help me," it said, softer now, more desperate. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one there, just the rocking chair. Slowly, it stopped moving and everything went still again. I backed up toward the door, my nerves on edge. I was about to leave when I saw something near the fireplace. It was a photo, half hidden beneath a pile of old newspapers. I leaned down to pick it up. The image was blurry, old, and worn, but as I held it up to the light, I saw the figures clearly. It was a family. A man, a woman, and 2 children, smiling in front of the same house I stood in now. But there was something strange about their eyes. Their eyes weren't right. They were too dark, too empty, like they were staring through me rather than at me. I threw the photo back on the ground, a chill racing down my spine. I needed to get out of there, fast. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps behind me. Light, hesitant steps that echoed through the empty house. I froze, too terrified to look back. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now, the weight of someone watching me. The air thickened, the pressure building in my chest, as though the house itself was closing in on me. I spun around, but the room was empty. There was no one there, just the flickering light from my flashlight, casting long, strange shadows on the walls. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, tripping over the threshold as I scrambled to get outside. I barely had time to look back at the house before I slammed the door shut and ran to my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look at the house again, but I could feel its presence, like it was standing right behind me, just waiting. As I drove away, I could still hear the whisper, soft in my ear, like a lover's voice. "Help me." By the time I reached the main road again, the house had disappeared behind the trees. The whisper faded into the distance, but the unease lingered. I drove for miles, not looking back, trying to push the images out of my mind. It was a few days later that I found the newspaper clipping. It was buried deep in the archives of an old library, something that caught my eye while I was looking for something else entirely. The headline read, "Family vanishes on Old Hollow Road, search efforts fail." The article described the exact family from the photo. They had lived in the house on Old Hollow Road, and from the way it was written, they had disappeared without a trace. The only thing left was a broken house, abandoned for decades. But here's the thing, the article didn't say they had died. It said they were lost. And there was something else, a detail hidden at the bottom of the article, almost as an afterthought. The last known location of the family was their home. Neighbors reported strange noises in the woods late at night, and some even claimed to hear whispers on the wind. I never went back to Old Hollow Road, but every time I pass a stretch of dark woods or a lonely stretch of road, I feel the weight of those eyes on me, just beyond the trees, waiting. I don't know what happened to that family, but sometimes late at night I still hear that whisper, "Help me." And I wonder, am I next? The road to nowhere. It all started with a detour. I know, everyone tells you to trust your GPS, but I never do. I like taking the scenic route. Maybe it's because I'm always on the road for work, traveling between towns, cities, and states. There's something about getting lost that makes me feel free. The feeling of being alone, away from everyone else's expectations, was a rare luxury in my life. It was just supposed to be another long drive, one more night spent in a cheap motel, and then back to the grind. But that night, it didn't go the way I expected. I was headed north, taking my usual route along some old back roads. The sun had just set, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out forever across the road. The air was heavy with that late summer humidity, and I had the windows rolled down, the smell of the earth and trees mixing with the faint scent of gas from my car's engine. It was peaceful, too peaceful. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. The GPS blipped and gave me a notification that I was off route. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Sometimes it gets confused. But when I checked the screen, there was no real reason for me to be off route. I was still on the main road, but I could see that the map had changed. The road I was on was now a jagged line, leading me off my path toward a long stretch of forest. I had no choice but to follow. At first, the road was fine, just a few potholes here and there. But as I drove deeper into the woods, things started to feel wrong. The trees were thicker here, so dense that the air felt stagnant, heavy. There was something strange about the way the forest was silent. No animals, no insects, just the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of wind in the leaves. As the road narrowed, I noticed something odd. The streetlights were out. It wasn't pitch black yet, but the lack of artificial light made the shadows stretch unnaturally far. That's when I saw it. A small sign, barely noticeable on the side of the road. It was old, weathered, and the letters had faded almost beyond recognition, but I could just make out one word: hollow. Now I've driven through some pretty isolated places, but the word hollow in a place like this, especially on a dark, quiet road, didn't sit well with me. It gave me an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I figured it was just an old town, long since abandoned. That was all. I kept driving. The road grew tighter. The trees seemed to lean in closer, the branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, a strange chill crawling through my skin. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, telling myself it was just the drop in temperature as the sun finally disappeared. But there was something about the stillness around me, the absence of sound, that made me feel trapped. Then I saw it. There, just ahead, in the distance, through the break in the trees, was a building. It was an old house, probably once a farmhouse, though it looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. The windows were boarded up, the roof sagging with time. There was an old wooden swing set in the yard, the chain swaying gently in the wind despite the fact there was no breeze. It was too still, too quiet. I should have kept going. I should have turned around right then and there. But something pulled me toward it. Curiosity, I guess. Maybe I thought I'd find someone to explain why I was on this road in the first place. I slowed the car, pulling off the side of the road near the house. The engine rattled to a stop, and for a moment, all I could hear was the silence pressing in from every direction. The air felt thick, as if it had substance. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching on the gravel beneath me, and looked up at the house. There was something almost alive about it. Not in a literal sense, of course, but in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at it, wondering if I should just leave. But then I saw it. A figure. In the window. It was hard to make out through the dirty glass, but there was definitely someone, or something, standing there. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel the eyes on me. Cold, piercing eyes that seemed to burn right through me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Was someone inside? My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run back to the car, but I didn't. I couldn't. My feet carried me closer to the house, my mind clouded with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. When I reached the porch, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was slightly ajar. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Maybe I thought someone had been living there, hiding out in the wilderness, away from the world. But it felt wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open just a crack, enough to peek inside. The air inside was stagnant, and the house smelled of mildew and decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped into the dimly lit foyer. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, leading to rooms that were swallowed in shadow. That's when I heard it, a low growl. Not from an animal. No, this was something different. A guttural sound that came from deep within the house, as though it was coming from the walls themselves. It rattled my bones, like something was waiting, hiding just beyond the dark. I stepped back, heart racing, and that's when I heard another sound. A soft whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, just barely. Go back. I spun around, but there was no one there, not a soul. I don't remember how fast I ran back to my car, but I was inside and driving before I even had the chance to think. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see something following me. But nothing was there. The road behind me was empty. The woods were still. I kept driving, not looking back. The further I went, the more I thought about what I had just experienced. The whisper, the growl, the figure in the window. When I made it back to the main road, I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I found a motel, checked in, and locked myself in the room. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. The next day, I went to the library and asked about the house on Hollow Road. I wanted to know what had happened, what I had walked into. The librarian's face went pale when I mentioned it. She told me to stay away from it, that it had been abandoned for years. But when I pressed for more details, she reluctantly told me a story I'll never forget. The house was once owned by a family, a husband, wife, and their 2 children. They had lived there for years, until one night, they simply disappeared. No one knew what happened. The neighbors claimed they had heard strange sounds coming from the house for weeks before they vanished, but no one ever saw them leave. And the worst part? The figure I saw in the window? It was the family's youngest child. The librarian told me their name was Emily, but she didn't belong in the house anymore. She had been there, but she wasn't the same little girl. The house had claimed her, and now she was something else. A shadow, a voice on the wind. They never found the bodies, but sometimes when the moon was full, people still heard whispers on Hollow Road. Whispers that called to you, pulling you into the darkness. I haven't been back to Hollow Road since that night, and every time I drive through the woods, I can still hear that whisper. Go back. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I'll see her, Emily, watching from the trees. But I won't go back. Not ever again. The Silent Watcher. I should have never taken the shortcut. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was because I was running late to meet a friend at the bar, or maybe it was just that usual impulse to take a road less traveled. You know the feeling. You're tired of the same old paths, the same familiar routes, and you just want something different. A change of pace. That's exactly how I felt. So I turned off the main road and onto this dirt path I'd never noticed before. It seemed harmless enough. Just a small road that cut through the forest, connecting a couple of back roads I was familiar with. But the moment I made the turn, I felt something shift in the air. A strange heaviness settled around me, and the road, which seemed so innocent at first, suddenly felt wrong. It wasn't even that the road was bad. There were no strange bumps or sharp turns, nothing that would make me think twice. It was just the way the trees seemed to close in, the branches hanging overhead like skeletal hands. The dense foliage obscured the sky, leaving the whole world feeling like it had dimmed to a twilight shade, even though the sun was still up. I shrugged it off as nothing more than my imagination getting the best of me, but deep down I knew I'd made a mistake. I wasn't the type of person to believe in superstitions or ghost stories. I thought that stuff was just for the movies, for the people who got spooked too easily. But I started to feel that unmistakable prickling sensation on the back of my neck. You know the one. The feeling that someone's watching you, but when you look around, there's no one there. I drove faster, telling myself it was just the isolation of the road getting to me. The trees seemed to stretch endlessly, like they were drawing me deeper into the woods, and the further I went, the less I could see of the world outside. The road was narrow, the trees pressed so tightly together that I couldn't even see beyond the thick trunks. The air was still, thick with the scent of wet earth and pine, but there was no breeze. No sound of the usual forest life. It was too quiet. I glanced at the rearview mirror, just a quick check to make sure I wasn't being followed, and that's when I saw it. A figure. It was standing on the side of the road, partially hidden by the trees. I couldn't make out much, just the outline of a person, tall, cloaked in shadow. They were motionless, just standing there, staring at me. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for me. It was like they knew I was coming. The way they stood so still, so unnervingly still, made my breath catch in my throat. I couldn't explain it, but something in my gut told me to turn around and leave immediately. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kept driving, my eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see them following me, but they weren't. They were still standing there, on the edge of the trees, watching. I tried to shake off the dread clawing at me, telling myself I was just overthinking things. It was probably just someone else on the road, maybe a hitchhiker or someone in distress. But that didn't make sense. This road didn't lead anywhere. There were no towns for miles. Why would anyone be standing there? So I pushed the thought aside and tried to focus on the road ahead. The trees seemed to grow thicker as I drove, the shadows deeper, stretching longer as the sun sank lower behind the horizon. The road curved sharply, and I was so focused on the bends that I didn't notice the strange noises at first. Distant rustling, the sound of something heavy moving just off the road. I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something larger, so I didn't pay it much attention. But then it came again. A crack. A distinct snap of a branch. I wasn't alone anymore. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and this time, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure. They were there again, but they were closer now. Much closer. The shadow that had once been standing by the trees was now on the road behind me, just visible in the dimming light. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as I sped up. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. I kept checking the rearview mirror, terrified that I would see that figure right behind me. But every time I looked, they were further away, fading in and out of view, as if they were never really there at all. The shadows outside were stretching long and dark, but as I glanced to my left, something made me freeze. I saw something moving just beyond the trees. Shapes, figures, their outlines indistinct, shifting in the dark. I couldn't tell what they were, but they weren't human. At least not entirely. They seemed to be following me. My heart raced, my thoughts scattered in a panic as I floored the gas pedal even more, the car roaring beneath me. The figures were growing closer, though they didn't seem to move like people did. They were too fast, too fluid, like they were flowing through the trees, not running, not walking, just moving. I kept looking ahead, desperate to see the end of the road, but it felt like the forest was closing in on me, like the road was never going to end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it. The end of the path, the first glimpse of civilization, a small farmhouse just at the edge of the woods. I didn't care what it was. I didn't care if it was abandoned or inhabited. I just needed to get there. I needed safety. I screeched to a halt in the driveway, not bothering to check if anyone was home, not caring. I threw the car into park and ran to the door, pounding on it with frantic urgency. No one answered. I banged again, my palms sore, but still no response. I didn't know why I thought knocking would help. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? I turned around, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart still hammering in my chest. The figures from the woods had stopped at the edge of the yard. They were watching me, their features still obscured by the trees. But I could feel their presence, cold, dead. My blood turned to ice when I heard a voice, a whisper. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted back to my car, jumping in and slamming the door behind me. I didn't even start the engine before I threw it in reverse and slammed my foot on the gas. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, until the lights of civilization felt real again. I haven't taken that shortcut since, and I never will. The worst part? I still hear the whispers sometimes, in the quiet moments, in the silence of the night. Run! The forgotten road. I was driving home from a long day at work, and like usual, I was looking forward to getting back to the comfort of my apartment. It was one of those days where everything felt off. A mix of exhaustion and frustration had built up throughout the day, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I took the same route I always did, Highway 47, a familiar road that I'd driven down countless times. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy, as if the world around me had gone still. There were no cars on the road, no animals rustling in the trees, just a sense of utter silence. At first, I thought it was just me. I was tired, maybe a little too on edge, but the stillness started to gnaw at me. The night sky was clear, but there was something oppressive about the darkness. The headlights from my car illuminated only a small stretch of road ahead, and everything outside that felt like a void, a place where things didn't quite belong. I had taken this road hundreds of times, but for some reason tonight, it felt like it was drawing me in. I don't know how else to describe it, but as I continued driving, I started to notice things I'd never paid attention to before, like the way the trees seemed to press closer to the road, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers, or the way the pavement seemed almost too smooth, too perfect. It didn't feel natural, and then I saw it, a road sign, one I didn't recognize. I glanced at it quickly, my mind processing it as I continued driving. It read, Pine Hollow Road, 10 miles. I didn't remember that road, but that didn't surprise me. I hadn't explored every part of the town. I figured it was just another one of those roads that led off the highway, maybe toward a farm or an isolated house. But then I felt that strange tug. Something about the sign, the name of the road. It didn't sit right with me. It felt like I had to go down it. Against my better judgment, I turned the wheel and made the sharp right onto Pine Hollow Road. The instant I did, a sense of unease settled deep in my gut. The pavement beneath my tires shifted from smooth to gravel, and the trees on either side of the road seemed to crowd closer together, blocking out what little light the moon had to offer. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that I was just being dramatic. But then, the wind picked up, carrying with it a strange, sickly sweet smell. It wasn't like fresh air, but more like rotting leaves or decaying wood. I rolled my window down, hoping the fresh air would clear my head, but the smell only got worse. A shiver ran down my spine as I pressed on the gas, urging my car to move faster, to get out of the oppressive woods surrounding me. And then I heard it, a soft sound barely audible over the hum of the engine. It was a whisper, almost as if the trees were talking. I leaned forward, trying to listen, but the voice was too faint. All I could make out was a single word: leave. I froze. My eyes darted around, trying to pinpoint where the voice had come from, but there was no one. The road ahead stretched out in eerie silence, the trees forming a thick tunnel that closed me in. My heart raced as I thought about turning around. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. I decided to press on. Then I saw it. A figure in the distance, standing at the edge of the road. It was barely more than a silhouette, a dark shape against the dim light. I slammed my foot on the brake, the tires screeching as I came to a stop. I couldn't make out the person's features, but I could feel their presence. Unnatural. And my eyes locked onto the figure as I gripped the steering wheel. I was too far away to get a good look, but I could feel them staring at me. It wasn't like how a normal person would look at you. This was colder, more calculating, more like an animal stalking its prey. And then, just as suddenly as I had seen it, the figure vanished. No movement, no sound, just gone. I knew I should have turned back then. I should have driven as fast as I could, but something kept me on the road. I couldn't explain why, but I kept driving. The further I went, the darker the road became. The trees seemed to close in even tighter, the shadows stretching and moving like they had a life of their own. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered, then went out completely. The world around me plunged into darkness. I panicked. I banged the steering wheel, trying to get the lights back on, but the car wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in complete silence. The only sound, the soft rustling of the leaves in the trees. I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead too. The battery had drained in an instant. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how long I sat there trying to figure out what to do. The dread I felt was almost physical, like something was closing in on me. The temperature had dropped, and I could see my breath fogging up in the cold air. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare make a sound. The footsteps circled my car, just outside the reach of the headlights. It sounded like something was stalking me, just out of sight. The air around me grew heavy, suffocating. I could feel the weight of whatever was out there, and I knew, deep down, that I couldn't outrun it. And then I heard the voice again. Only this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a command. Get out. My blood ran cold. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I opened the car door. Maybe I thought I could confront whatever it was, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't afraid. Big mistake. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt something grab me. Cold, bony fingers wrapped around my wrist, pulling me backward. The sensation was unnatural, too strong, too forceful. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The world around me was spinning, a dizzying whirl of darkness and shadow. And that's when I saw it. The road behind me. It wasn't the same road I had turned onto. The trees were gone. The road had turned to dirt, leading into a desolate field. There were no signs of life, no buildings, no cars, just an endless stretch of emptiness. And standing in front of me, under the pale moonlight, was a figure. A twisted, crooked thing, hunched and deformed, its face obscured by a hood. It was smiling, no, grinning, its teeth unnaturally sharp. And behind it, there was a faint glow, the flicker of something I could barely make out. But then the ground trembled beneath me and everything went black. When I woke up, I was back on the highway, just a few miles from where I had turned off. I had no idea how I'd gotten there or how much time had passed, My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I've never taken that road again, and I never will. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the footsteps. And when I look in the rearview mirror, I swear I see those eyes watching me from the darkness. The darkening woods. I'll never forget that night. It was a late fall evening, the air crisp and chilly, and I was driving through the countryside to visit my aunt. She lived in a house on the edge of a dense forest, a place I'd been to countless times without issue. But that night, something felt different. It started with the road. I'd never been the best with directions, but I had always managed to find my way without much trouble. That night, though, I found myself lost. I had followed the winding country roads for what felt like hours, only to realize that I was no longer on the path I knew. I checked my phone. No signal. Of course, the one time I needed it, I couldn't reach anyone. The trees around me were thick, so thick they seemed to swallow up the light. The forest stretched endlessly on both sides of the narrow dirt road, the branches intertwining above me, blocking out the moon. The road, once passable, now seemed overgrown, as though it had not been traveled in years. I could feel my heart start to race. My car's headlights barely pierced the darkness, and the night felt suffocating. The air smelled damp, earthy, like rotting leaves and moss. I rolled down my window, hoping to clear my mind with the fresh air, but it did nothing to ease the anxiety creeping into my bones. Suddenly I saw it, a figure standing motionless on the side of the road. It was far off at first, just a silhouette, but as I drew closer, I could make out the shape of a man, tall, hunched over, his back to me. He didn't move, didn't seem to notice the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness. Something was wrong. I slowed the car as I approached, uncertain whether to stop or drive past. There was no way to tell if he was lost like me or something else. I rolled my window down slightly, trying to gather the courage to say something. "Hey," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you all right?" No response. The man just stood there, unnervingly still. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I felt an inexplicable urge to leave. But I didn't. I continued driving slowly, eyes locked on the figure. As I passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something about the way he stood, as though he was waiting for me. I pushed the pedal down a little harder, desperate to get away from that eerie presence. And then, just as I thought I had passed him, I heard something. A soft sound, almost like a whisper. It was so faint I wasn't sure if it was my imagination. But then it came again. "Turn back." I froze, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. The voice had come from behind me, from the figure. I dared not look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to know what was there. Instead, I sped up, hoping to outrun whatever was happening. But the road seemed to stretch on and on. The trees pressed closer, the darkness thickening. The unsettling silence began to weigh on me, the hum of my engine the only sound. I looked up ahead, and that's when I saw it. Another figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking my way. This one was closer than the first. A woman, her long white dress billowing in the wind, her hair tangled and wild, her face hidden by her hair. I slammed the brakes, the car screeching as it came to a halt. My hands trembled as I tried to figure out what to do. I should have turned around. I should have driven back, but there was something drawing me in. The woman, she was beckoning me, her arms outstretched toward me. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I stepped out of the car. "What's going on?" I whispered to myself, my voice shaking. I couldn't stop myself from walking toward her. It was like I was in a trance, each step feeling more like a command than a choice. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was suffocating, like something terrible was about to happen. As I drew closer, her face finally became visible, but it wasn't a face at all, at least not in any way I understood. Her skin was pale, too pale, stretched tightly over her skull, and her eyes were black, as if there were no pupils or whites, just empty voids staring back at me. And then her mouth opened, impossibly wide, showing rows of jagged teeth, sharp and irregular. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The ground beneath me felt like it was shifting, pulling me closer to her. I stumbled backward, my feet tangled in the underbrush, but I couldn't break free. Her hand reached toward me, slow and deliberate, and I felt the chill of her fingers graze my arm. It felt like ice. I finally broke away, running back to my car, my breath ragged. The woman didn't follow, but I could still feel her presence behind me, watching. I got in, slamming the door shut, my hands shaking as I started the engine. The headlights flickered, and for a moment I thought I was seeing things. I looked in the rearview mirror. The man was there. And he wasn't standing anymore, he was moving. He wasn't walking like a normal person. It was more like he was gliding, his legs barely touching the ground. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, his eyes locked on me through the mirror. His smile was wide, too wide, and his teeth gleamed in the darkness. "Leave now!" The words echoed in my mind, and for the first time, I didn't need a second thought. I floored the accelerator, the tires screeching as I sped down the road. The world outside blurred, the darkness around me pressing in like it wanted to swallow me whole. I don't remember how long I drove. Hours, maybe. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. The road ahead finally opened up, and I recognized the lights of the town in the distance. But as I passed the sign welcoming me back, I saw it. The same figure standing at the edge of the road. The man, the woman, and a third figure now, their faces hidden in the shadows. I've never been back to that road. The memory still haunts me every night. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, just on the edge of my mind. You're still here. The road to nowhere. I've been driving for hours. The sun set long ago, and now it's just me and the endless stretch of highway. It should have been a routine drive, a simple trip from one small town to another. But something about tonight feels off. The highway is empty, and the night is suffocatingly quiet. The hum of my tires on the asphalt is the only sound, and even that is beginning to feel unnatural. I check the time. It's late, past midnight. The headlights from my car cut through the darkness, but they feel weak against the vast, oppressive blackness around me. The trees on either side of the road are dense and thick, casting long shadows that seem to twitch in the corners of my vision. I've driven this route countless times before, but tonight, the road feels different. I shake the thought from my mind. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it's the isolation starting to get to me. I'm overthinking things. I turn the radio on, but all I get is static. I try adjusting the dial, twisting it in every direction, but nothing changes. It's just that constant low hum. I turn it off and try to focus on the road ahead, but then I notice something strange. A figure standing on the side of the road. At first I think it's just a tree or a trick of the headlights, but no. It's a person. A man, standing motionless, his back to me. I feel a jolt of unease in my chest. It's not that I'm scared, more like I'm unnerved by the sheer oddness of it. Who would be out here alone at this time of night? I slow the car down, then stop a few feet away from him. I glance around. There's no other car in sight, no house nearby, just miles of empty road. "Hey!" I call out through the open window. My voice sounds too loud in the silence. No response. I don't get out of the car, but I can see him better now. He's tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long, dark coat. His head is tilted slightly down and his hands are shoved into his pockets. He doesn't look up, doesn't move. My skin prickles. It's almost like he's waiting for me to say something, but I can't bring myself to speak again. I'm not sure why, but something about him feels wrong, like he's not supposed to be there. I turn the wheel, preparing to drive off, but then his head jerks up so fast it almost looks unnatural. His eyes are wide open, staring straight at me, glowing faintly in the headlights. But it's not just his eyes, it's everything about him. His face is pale, almost sickly looking. His lips stretched tight in an eerie, emotionless smile. The smile doesn't reach his eyes. His gaze feels like a punch to my chest, like he's seeing straight through me. I slam my foot on the gas, the car jerking forward as I speed past him. But even as I drive away, I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching me. I glance in the rearview mirror, my heart racing. The man is gone, but the feeling of him, of something watching me, lingers. I try to shake off the unease, but it's impossible. The silence in the car feels suffocating now, the darkness pressing in on me from every direction. I focus on the road, but my mind keeps drifting back to that man. Why was he out there? What did he want? I try calling someone, anyone, just to hear a familiar voice, but my phone has no signal. My stomach sinks as I glance at the empty screen. I'm alone. I pass another mile marker and that's when I see it. A sign. It's small, almost faded, but I can make out the words, "Welcome to Nowhere." My stomach tightens. What? I know this road. I know the towns around here. I've never seen this sign before. I slow down, trying to figure out what's going on, but the road looks exactly the same. Same thick trees, same empty stretch of highway. I press on, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of it. And then, I see him again. The man, standing by the side of the road. This time, he's not facing me. He's turned around, his back to me as if waiting. I don't even think. I grab the wheel and veer left, nearly losing control of the car as I swerve into the dirt. I glance in my side mirror. He's still there. But now it's like he's not just standing. He's moving, slowly, steadily, walking toward me. Each step is deliberate, dragging his feet through the dirt. The eerie smile is still there, stretching impossibly wide. I'm shaking. I can't breathe. The road feels endless, like I'm stuck in some sort of loop. I can't remember how long I've been driving, but now it feels like hours. Like I've been in the same spot forever, going in circles, never getting anywhere. I try to turn around, but the car stalls, sputtering out before it can even start. I hit the gas repeatedly, my heart pounding, the man growing closer with each passing second. He's almost at the edge of the car now, still walking, still smiling. I can't stop shaking. I can't think straight. I'm trapped. I open the door and step outside before I even realize what I'm doing. The cold air hits me like a slap, and for a split second the world feels so still, so quiet. The man is right in front of me now, standing at the side of the car. His smile is wide, teeth sharp and yellowed, eyes wide and unblinking. "You shouldn't have come here," he says, his voice raspy, like gravel being ground underfoot. My throat tightens. I don't remember how to speak. I try to back away, but my legs feel like they're made of stone. Every part of my body screams at me to move, to run, but I can't. The world around me is spinning, and all I can see is that smile, that awful, horrifying smile. "You're mine now," he whispers. Suddenly, the ground shifts beneath me, the dirt crumbling away like sand in the wind. I can feel myself being pulled, slowly but surely, into the earth. Panic surges, and I scream, trying to claw my way back to the surface, but the more I fight, the deeper I fall. And then, in the distance, I see the sign again. "Welcome to Nowhere." I wake up with a jolt. My heart is pounding. My hands are clammy. For a moment, I think I'm still in the car, still stuck on that road. But when I open my eyes, I'm lying in my bed, the soft light of the morning creeping through the window. I sit up, trying to steady my breath, trying to make sense of what happened. It was just a dream. It had to be, right? But then I glance at the clock. The time reads 3:33 a.m., and on the wall just above my dresser I see something that makes my blood run cold. A smile. A wide, jagged smile drawn in what looks like dark ink. It's there, staring at me, impossibly large, stretching from one end of the wall to the other. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that I'm not alone.